Hello and welcome to the NewsWhip Pulse. I'm Paul Quigley from NewsWhip. As always on the Pulse, we are talking to people who are doing innovative things at the intersection of data and communications. And this week, I'm joined by the Director of Strategic Intelligence at Methods+Mastery, Brian Mossop. Brian, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. It's great to be here.
So we're thrilled to have Brian on because Methods+Mastery is a new specialty agency within Fleischmann Hillard's global network, and it's bringing together social, creative, and data-driven specialists, which is kind of exactly at the intersection of where NewsWhip sits. So you can see why we have a lot of questions and a lot of interest in what Brian does. At Methods+Mastery, the team acknowledges that data overload exists, and they wade through research to fill in the gaps where others have failed to get meaning out of that data, and use intelligence born from the current digital landscape that we're all operating in today. So we're going to be talking today about brand health, measuring it, predicting it, and other work that Methods+Mastery do, I think a lot of it quite uniquely in the ecosystem today. We're coming out live. As always, if you have any questions, please drop them into the chat. Danielle, our producer, will triage those and we'll get to them in the last few minutes of our conversation. And we will be putting up a recording of this later. So if there's anything interesting, we'll be sending that out to everyone who attended as well, along with the transcript. So, okay, Brian, let's get right to it. So maybe we set the stage first. If you can tell us a bit about Methods+Mastery, which is within the Fleischmann Hillard Global Network, but an independent agency. Can you tell us about why it was created and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. You're exactly right. Methods of Mastery is part of the Fleischmann Hillard network. We were created to kind of handle some of the business that Fleischmann Hillard couldn't. Over the years, we've really developed our focus into marketing analytics and marketing social strategy and things like that, the creative elements that you mentioned. And that's our world. We're comprised of roughly 20 plus analysts. So really kind of intelligence forms the basis for everything that we do. And I know a lot of agencies say that, but that's a real commitment of ours, and part of the North Star that we align to.
And does that mean that you are like a small agency or a part of a big agency, or how does that interact? Being kind of a specialist, super analytical unit, but within the wider network.
Yeah, I mean, at its very basic level, we just work on different clients and different kind of goals for those clients. So to that extent, we are independent, but at the same time, we always are sharing methodologies and findings and learnings kind of across the network as we can, because there's always work being done on both sides, and so there's always opportunities for us to kind of come together and really put the best of both of our worlds forward for the clients we work with.
Right. And one of the places where you're doing, I think, some really innovative work is around brand health and brand reputation. And that was definitely where, we're thinking about today's pulse, you wanted to focus. Can you tell us a bit about, how you're thinking about and measuring brand reputation today, metrics that you're paying attention to?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, brand health is top of mind for a lot of comms and marketing professionals right now, both on agency side and on client side. What we're particularly interested in, again, being kind of firmly entrenched in the marketing intelligence and marketing analytics world, is figuring out how these different kind of marketing signals, and there's thousands of them that exist. We want to understand how each of those kind of pushes and pulls on the levers, so to speak, on brand health scores. Right? Like this is kind of brand health is really about perception of a brand to some extent, and the reputation of that brand amongst its followers and its fans. So it's an interesting space for us because the way I like to think about it is, a lot of marketing efforts kind of that look at last click attribution, they're trying to come in and tie a specific post to a single sale, right? And there's a lot of value in that. But our kind of belief is when you're looking at something a little bit broader than that, so you get into the brand health arena, there's so many different aspects that can kind of contribute to that. But if you get it right, whereas attribution is going to get you a single sale from a post. If you get the brand health and brand perception and really drive that point home with consumers, you're going to enable a lifetime of sales because these people become fans of the brand and loyal to that brand. And so that's why we think it's really important, especially for marketing firms and marketing organizations within larger companies really need to be focused on this because there are tangible and actionable things that can come out of this once we understand how this is all connected and how it all ties to ultimately to brand health and reputation.
And with brand health and reputation maybe traditionally being measured through survey data or NPS or other after the fact measures, what are the other KPIs and data points you're paying attention to? And are you trying to find things that are more predictive and forward looking in terms of brand health?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think no matter which way you get there, brand health is usually assessed by some sort of survey, right? To kind of get that kind of consumer perception and understanding of and expectations of what that brand should do. But fortunately, there's a lot of tools out there and technology vendors that are doing surveys at scale, right, for across different brands. And so they're syndicating this survey research to people like us, right? So it's kind of taking the onus off of us to conduct that primary research to get, those endpoints that we're looking at because there's all this syndicated survey research that's out there. And that's an amazing thing for us because it's a lot of information about a number of brands. And they track these things weekly, right? So it's really hard to get that sort of granular look at brand health for any company. If you're doing it yourselves, right? You kind of would have to do this repeatedly week after week to really get the same amount of data. So we're fortunate to be able to have that sort of syndicated data to really build these complicated models around.
So if the health is being measured here by the surveys and the syndicated data, you're also trying to find the signals and the KPIs that are going to feed into and drive that outcome and measure those too, right, Brian?
That's right. That's right. I mean, that's what this big project that we're talking about was really about. We wanted to understand. We knew that there's hundreds, probably thousands, of different marketing signals that might affect brand health overall, right? And so what we wanted to do was build a model where we can look at those inputs as granular as possible, right? So if we're just looking at earned news coverage, we might want to break out that coverage by topic. We may want to break it out by publication. We may even want to go as granular as specific reporters so that we can understand how each of these individual signals might contribute to positive or negative changes in brand health. So it's important to go as granular as possible so that you have a really good understanding of what is actually at play here and not, some kind of correlation with another variable, right? That really would be driving the effect. You want to get as precise as possible because that's where the real information gets translated to clients. We want to be able to take this information and say, here are the things that you should really dial up next month, and here are the things you really need to kind of address to steer the ship in the positive direction. And we do that because, again, we're looking at these very granular marketing inputs. But that's very complicated to do, especially for a human to do. How could we possibly kind of assess thousands of signals, look for not only for correlations, but figure out which of those signals are actually predictive of brand health? That's just not possible without machines. So, I feel fortunate that we have invested a lot in bringing people on who are experts in data science and machine learning and data engineering and advanced analytics. And I feel fortunate to work with some of the best in the industry who, I like to say, make my job a lot easier to kind of take great work and show it to clients. Like that's what really excites me. So we've made that investment, and that has enabled us to create these models that can crunch those numbers in those ways and look for those signals, again, that are not just correlated to brand health scores, but are actually predictive of those scores 2 to 4 weeks out.
So as you can imagine, we get very excited when we're talking about prediction, Brian, given our own interest in that. And one of the beauties of, good models is we can tell ourselves a story about any one of these 1,000 data points and why it might drive brand health and why it might drive different answers to those questions a month or 6 weeks down the line. but in the end, only some of those stories will become true. And often the data can demonstrate which ones will come true. I know that there may be sensitivities with naming clients, but can you walk us through at a whatever level of detail you're comfortable with an example of how this has worked for one of your clients?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, we work with a number of Fortune 500 companies in the technology industry and other industries as well. Um, this kind of topic around understanding how marketing is driving brand health, I would say, is becoming of greater importance to the industry. We're under tremendous scrutiny to show return on investment for marketing dollars spent. Um, and we just really feel that kind of going after those lofty goals of figuring out how marketing initiatives are, again, not just driving sales, but driving perception of the brand, that's valuable information for any brand. And so, we've kind of rolled this out for some specific clients, but this type of model scales across our entire business. We could do this for any client in any industry, as long as there's enough data there to form the models around, right? And that's the biggest challenge that I think that we experience in comms and marketing is the availability of data. To kind of build out the models, these predictive models that we're talking about for brand health, we needed about 2 years of historical data, and that's both on the input side and on the brand health side, on that output side, right? It's a lot of data for companies to have access to. Um, so traditionally that's done in one of two ways. Either you purchase tools that have kind of the ability to historically crawl content and bring that information in, or I think what you're starting to see more and more are companies are kind of taking their own approach to data warehousing and things like that, collecting and storing their own data. And I think that's a good thing, right? Because that enables down the line, if these companies do want to build predictive models around things, they have a good base. They have the information that's needed in order to do that. Because a lot of times when we might come in and companies will say, well, we don't have 2 years of X, Y, and Z data. And then we have to kind of figure out like, okay, how do we start collecting these things? How do we get started with what we have? So, I think like that's the opportunity for brands is to really do something with the data to have a strategy on how they're going to archive data, how they're going to make it available, what type of data they're storing. And that I think is going to allow us to translate this into more and more clients. For instance, right, a lot of these syndicated brand health scores are only for the largest companies. But what if we want to do a company, look at brand health for a company that's not in that index? We might have to rely on their own data. You mentioned NPS scores and survey data. Maybe they have that, right? So it's complicated. We want to roll this out to as many brands as possible because we really think that it can help. We're really seeing actionable insights, down to do this, action with this specific reporter, or, dial up your own marketing efforts on these topics because those are what are translated, seem to be predictive of brand health scores. We know that can help a lot of brands, but we just need to, think through the data strategy on how we're going to actually bring that to life.
Sorry, Brian, to interrupt, but being concrete that you are seeing then that a brand engaging either with particular communities or on particular topics is much more of a driver than 10 other things that could be drivers. And you're saying, okay, if we want this to move in a month's time, we need to engage with these communities or on these topics, and even with these publications, and even with this journalist.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that's what this model does. Like the first stage of the model is look at these 1,000 inputs and just tell us which ones we need to worry about. What are the 5 or 10 that are really driving the most, which are the most predictive of changes in brand health, right? And so that just makes it uses machines to do what they do best, which is kind of collect and collate and sort data and kind of filter that down, right? So now we can bring an analyst in and kind of look at those specific inputs because we've kind of taken it from thousands to maybe 5 or 6 or 10. So it becomes a much more tractable solution in that way. And then, of course, the models have additional needs where they are additional functions where they are forecasting brand health scores in the future. We kind of compare that to what's happened in the past, and with very high statistical certainty, we can say like, hey, these are the 10 marketing inputs that you really need to focus on But not only that, when our analysts kind of get a hold of that data, they're able to be much more prescriptive. And, that's what I was kind of alluding to before was we can say, hey, you need to dial up media relations with these specific outlets or reporters. These are the things you need to do from an own social perspective. These are the things you need to get a hold of from the earned social conversation, right? Because this is what we're kind of seeing come in from the community and appear in that conversation. So it's really the best. I think that's what's so exciting about it is it's really bringing the two things together, letting machines do what they do best, right? Which is collect and kind of collate and sort that data, filter it down, and then bring in humans to do what they do best, which is draw disparate connections in data. And this is an area where Methods and Mastery has really doubled down, bringing these two things together, because that's really where you're delivering the most precise insights to your clients.
And when I imagine the models at work here, the inputs, the outputs, one of the kind of worries I'd have is that the media ecosystem and culture is not a closed system. There's new issues emerging all the time. There's new political perspectives, new groups emerging. Competition perceptions are constantly moving in a way that could render a model potentially or one of these drivers much less relevant pretty quickly, right? Or a new one to the come onto the landscape pretty quickly. How do you deal with that? This is maybe something that's an issue as well in polls, like that are too structured and don't capture new things that are emergent. But this is the ML and big data side of it.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think that's one of the hardest things in prediction. The predictions are only as good as the data coming into that. And so you need to understand that data coming in. Are there inherent biases in that data? Is it really saying what you think it's saying? So it's difficult, right? We really want to kind of take a look at and not bias our own selves into thinking like these are the data sources that we really need to focus on. The model itself, right? Like it's not just about clean data coming in and useful data coming in, but in any mathematical model, there's assumptions that are made to produce that model. So we have to get comfortable with uncertainty, and that's really difficult for us to do in the comms and marketing industry. People who come from kind of technical and statistical backgrounds, this is second nature to them, right? They understand that anything that you build computationally has assumptions built into it, and those will dictate the results, right? Those will really drive the accuracy of the results. So it's a lot of education in that domain as well. Because clients don't like certainty, but we have to kind of talk about it and be comfortable with it. And that's a skill as well. And that's a skill that, we're building out as an agency, is being able to interpret those results into actionable insights for a client, while not overselling it, while not overcommitting and not saying that the model is something that it isn't, making sure that the assumptions are very clear, so that we understand how to interpret those results in a meaningful way.
Well, let's talking about turning this into actions, like there's got to be, is there a new workflow here? Because you may be recommending quite specific actions based on longer term brand health goals. How does that workflow work between Methods and Mastery and Fleischmann and clients? How do you bring these insights, which all have a sell-by date, right? Because we've developed something that's got quite powerful insight if we can put it to work now. How does that happen? And is there a changing workflow and relationship with clients that comes with that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point too. Ultimately, we deliver all of our insights to our client, right? But oftentimes, as we all know, a lot of companies are kind of highly matrixed. Marketing is often separate from comms and PR and things like that. So it's a challenge. When we present kind of these cohesive and complete findings to our client, we also have to figure out, well, how do we get that activated internally for them? How do we take the insights that we've derived from earned news coverage and create, get that in front of the PR and comms team so that they can incorporate that into their media relations strategy, right? Sometimes even within marketing, like, social production is split from social analytics, right? And so we have to kind of figure out how we get this really powerful and actual information in the right hands, because ultimately you can only tell clients like these are the things that from a statistical standpoint we're fairly certain are um, driving changes in your brand health. Um, yeah, we just need to kind of start having that conversation so that it just does, so it's actionable and we actually do something with the data that we're deriving from the models, because there is a lot of actionable stuff there. So it's tough, but like that's why we have good relationships with our clients, and we help them kind of think through these challenges and come up with a strategy on how they might kind of socialize this within their organization as well.
Yeah, like it's kind of a perennial problem, I would say, especially for people who are the audience here at the Pulse, because you got people who are at the more analytical end of the communications industry and come from more analytical backgrounds, and often um, have developed insights and methods, but it's a question of how to get the behavior moving around those. It's different every time, but you said working closely with clients being key. I suppose is earning trust. Is how you present the information make a big difference as well, or how do you are there any other tips and tricks from Methods and Mastery for making sure that insights are put into action?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's why storytelling is so important, even when you're talking about analytics, because it's not just about the numbers, it's how do you communicate what those numbers mean. And this is an area that Methods of Mastery has really excelled at, kind of telling the story behind data. I kind of often draw parallels to what we do to kind of what a data journalist might do, right? And kind of how do you explain something really, really complicated in ways that are understandable by the general public. And that's not meant to be like a disparaging comment at all. It's just like we come from different worlds, right? Um, and so storytelling becomes crucial to what we do. But it's also, I consider that's really fun work for us as well. Because I think like for a lot of us at Methods and Mastery, there's that point where you see kind of a client's eyes light up because you tell them something that's really actionable, understandable from data. And again, that kind of, you were talking about trust, like that builds trust as well, right? We need to kind of make clients comfortable, like I said, with uncertainty, but with quantitative information overall, we need to make them comfortable with that by telling stories, right, on how we might act upon this, what these numbers really mean. That's another way for us to really build sound trust in with our clients because they know that what we're doing is accurate and meaningful.
Yeah, and when you look at the future, Brian, at like the successes you're having there, do you think this advanced benchmarking that you're working on, or the predictive benchmarking almost, and no, like, there's a better phrase, but you know what I mean, I think.
Yeah.
Is that drastically going to change communication strategy and how people work in 5 years down the line?
I, I think it will. I think that communications and marketing is always going to draw from both sides of the spectrum, right? Is there's going to be a need for kind of quantitative information and data and kind of understanding that. But there's also a place for experience, intuition, and instinct as well. And it's just figuring out how to make those two work together. I don't like to think of them as kind of competing things. Like they both come together to make something that's greater than the sum of their parts. And so that's the space that we play in. Um, but I think that we're seeing our industry getting more and more comfortable with data-driven insights. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that there's kind of this paradigm shift that's going on in the industry. Um, and I think like that's why at Methods of Mastery we're so passionate, and bang the drum about the importance of data, because it's really powerful not to counteract instinct or intuition, but how to kind of inform a strategy that where you can bring that experience in and make something really great happen from a creative standpoint, from a social strategy standpoint. It's yeah, I think like that's it for me. It's showing that these two things are not competing; they can actually be used in tandem to do something really amazing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, we agree with that. with our kind of real-time predictions, which I think are still winning over people as they, see these kinds of things come to pass, or as they see the predictions bear out. And when you're doing like our software is predicting 24 hours down the line. When it comes to brand health metrics, you're looking how far down the line ahead, potentially, when you are of a piece of coverage or an event affecting brand health. How many weeks out would that be?
Yeah, our predictions are accurate 2 to 4 weeks out. And that's largely due to that, again, that 2 years of historical data, right? The more historical data you have, the further out in general you can predict. So that's kind of where we're at now, which is, I think it's a good space for clients. I think like changing social strategy in under a month's time is really tough. So, getting kind of monthly insights on what is changing and what's not, that really right now is kind of serving as the best cadence for us. So monthly to quarterly, I would say, is really kind of that sweet spot for clients for understanding
Okay, so
how that information.
you're bringing the client's attention to, and there's a good bit of thinking and work that goes in every 2 to 4 weeks about directionally how the key metrics and predictions are tracking.
Yeah, well, I would say, just to clarify, I mean, like our predictions are accurate 2 to 4 weeks out. We're delivering recommendations either monthly or quarterly. So we're kind of taking all of this in and not only looking for, okay, this week, these are the marketing signals you need to worry about. Week two, these are the different set of signals you need to worry about. We're kind of looking at them together and looking for the trends, right? And so, yeah, I think like monthly to quarterly insights that's what's going to be the most impactful for clients.
So here's an interesting. We're just getting to our last few minutes already. So if you've got a question, please drop it in. Danielle's already got one that's come through from member of the audience. If brand health is relative, do you weigh brand mentions differently during slower news cycles? This is a great question because we're seeing a big, like we just did a piece with Axios this week about the drop off in media engagement generally, and in particular on political topics. We're seeing kind of a 27 to 30, even 40% drops off in traffic and social engagement. A lot of the hot political things that people were losing their minds about last year. But, just generally people are, I guess, going to the beach after 18 months of being glued to their phones. So we're going to see a lot of lines trending downwards. So how do you account for this in a model that doesn't make it look like interest in a brand is declining when in fact there's just less people generating the numbers that are turning into KPIs?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's why we've really taken a step to incorporate seasonality in our data, or accounting for seasonality in data, right? Not to say that this is particularly seasonal, but I think you know what I mean. Like this is kind of a cycle of events that might happen. And again, like that's why having 2 years of historical data, you can see that happen, over the months. You can see interest wax and wane. And so, yeah, I think that's why it becomes particularly important in that realm.
Right. Yeah, the historical data helps a lot there. And when you're thinking about is sentiment a big part of what you're tracking, and how is your evaluation of the quality of that today? Or do you feel you're able to do that well, or does there need to be a bit of human nudging and oversight to ensure that it's not um, misunderstanding, trolling, or sarcasm?
Yeah, I mean, sentiment's tough, right? We all know that in our industry, especially when you're talking about kind of news articles, right? Like, how do you take a 1,000-word article? Is it positive, negative, or neutral? Well, in relation to what, right? And so that's why I think there's been a lot of emphasis placed on natural language processing driven sentiment analysis. And so that's one of the things that we've also been working on is we've created brand specific NLP models that are much more accurate than kind of out of the box sentiment scoring capabilities. And so that's right. Kind of factoring that into the model, you want to make sure it is accurate, right? So these kind of custom NLP models help us get there.
I think eventually we'll reach a kind of endpoint of accuracy that's possible there, because even people are frequently misunderstand one another when they're being sarcastic, especially cross cultures, right? So it's eventually we won't be able to get it right every time, I suppose, right?
That's right. That's right. Yeah, sarcasm is always a tough one. But the trained NLP models can help understand that. Um, but yeah, it's a constant challenge for us in the industry.
Yeah, yeah, it will be. So, Brian, it's been brilliant to have you on for a conversation today. I am really, you know, fascinated with how you're able to develop or how you've been able to isolate these reputation drivers weeks in advance. And I would also invite everyone who's here this week. We're going to be having another very special pulse in not exactly 2 weeks, in 2 weeks and 2 days. We're going to have Michael Young, who's the Global Insights Manager at Ford Motor Company, and they've been developing in-house analytics at a very high standard for 15 years. They've got a real background in doing analytics, and the intersection of analytics and communication is going to be a really interesting conversation focused on the Ford F-150, which I've been learning a lot about in the last few days. Brian, I hope you'll be joining us for that as well. I think you'll enjoy it.
It sounds amazing. I'll be there.
Brian, thanks so much. It's been brilliant to learn about methods and mastery. Do you have anything, people who'd like to learn more should visit the website or reach out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to have those conversations.
Brilliant. Okay. Thanks very much, Brian. And thanks everyone
All
for
right.
joining today.
Thanks, Paul.
Cheerio. Bye-bye.